Unending Orgasms, a DPT trip report by Kafka is God, uploaded to earward.org October 2nd, 2022. My background. The following story was my 6th time doing DPT. I'd done it twice in combination with LSD at dosages of 30 to 45 milligrams, and I had previously taken it in dosages ranging from 30 to 80 milligrams, 80 being by far my previously strongest psychedelic experience. As far as other psychedelics go, it is the one that I have enjoyed and gotten the most out of. As a background, I've done LSD many times, shrooms a few times, ayahuasca, MDMA, and many other RCs such as BK2CB, 4-HOMET, 4-ACO-DMT, 5-MeO-MIPT, MXE, and others. While I would not consider myself super experienced, I would not consider myself a novice either. As for my sexual experience on drugs, I had masturbated on 1 or 2 tryptamines before, but later into the trip, not during the peak. Setting. I had about 5 hours of sleep the night before, and I was generally stressed since I had a big test the day of my trip. I took 100mg of modafinil the day before, and 100mg again at noon, an hour before my test in order to maximise studying and test focus. I had a generally relaxing afternoon after the test. I played a bit of Dota, had dinner with some friends, and then went home for the night. I lived with 2 roommates. One roommate was away visiting friends this fateful Thursday night, and the other decided around 11 PM to go over to his girlfriend's house. Suddenly alone, I decided that might as well masturbate, and it had been a week or 2 since I'd used my prostate massage to get off. After taking a shower to relax and then taking a few minutes to lube and insert my massager, I realised again that no one else was home, and that I could leave my room naked if I so wished. My previous experiences with DPT always made me super aroused, and reinforced many erotic thoughts when they entered my head. So I decided that this night was going to be the night in which I experimented with DPT and prostate masturbation. Somewhat reluctantly removing the prostate massager, I took my milligram scale and went into the kitchen to take out the DPT from its envelope in the freezer. Since I didn't know exactly what was going to happen actually with the combination, I decided on the lowest dose I had done previously, which was 30mg, and this had brought on definite effects, but I could still function if necessary and cause no ego death. Wanting to get back to my bedroom as soon as possible, I quickly measured, wiped the counter with a Lysol wipe, and then proceeded to snort the 30mg. I started a timer on my computer, as I knew that heavy time dilation occurred even at 30mg for me previously, and I wanted to know where I was in this trip just in case. I spent 5 minutes putting away everything, and then hornily returned to my bedroom. After relubing the massager and finding a longish porn video in case I wanted visual stimulation, sometimes I just melt into the prostate masturbation and need no visual stimulation. This was around 10 minutes after I'd taken the DPT as well. After another 5 minutes of enjoyment, I started to notice definite effects. The lights were generally brighter and had a much larger aura. My penis, usually hard throughout a session, was relatively limp. I began noticing closed-eye visuals of flashes of lights of kaleidoscopic colours. Feeling better and better, I turned up the vibration intensity and brought myself to my first orgasm of the night, which was one of the strongest I had previously ever had. My entire body shuddered, adding on to the slight tremors DPT already had started to give me. During this orgasm, the effects came on full, making me forget entirely where I was, what I was doing, and what I was planning for that night. Opening my eyes again after what felt like 10 or 15 minutes, I realised looking at my stopwatch that I was masturbating in my room, and about only 30 seconds had actually passed. I realised that visual stimulation was going to be far less useful than audio stimulation, so I quickly turned on the album that I suffered a harsh ego death to on my 80mg DPT trip, Joris Vaughan's Nobody Knows. I only mention this since this may have aided the trip into how intense it soon became. For the next 25 minutes of real time, countless minutes for what I experienced, my entire body flooded with orgasmic sensation. Every part of my body, from head to toe, continuously contracted without a stop in pleasure. I had no concept of ego or ego boundary, and to me, the whole entire world and all other realities in my head, including every inanimate object, were shuddering with me. Once in a while, I was conscious enough to change the vibration intensity or vibration mode, but after a certain point, I realised that when I thought I'd been pressing the buttons, I actually had been doing nothing, and all changes were purely in my head. The best way I can describe the pleasure I felt was if one imagines their entire body is as sensitive as the head of a penis or a clitoris, and then they stepped into a deep, rushing, turbulent river. I had my eyes closed for most of this time, and the orgasms brushed along me with the beat of the music, painting pictures of fantastic, three-dimensional colour sculptures. One image I vividly remember was a giant sphere layered with colours radially and in my mind. The music was played on the surface of this sphere in a larger dimension than I could see, creating pulsing waves of green foam. Looking at my stopwatch again, I realised that I'd been experiencing this pleasure for about 30 minutes. I suddenly worried about overstimulation, and I decided that it may be best for me to not overextend my stay in Pleasure World, but instead finish a little earlier than my usual prostate massager sessions, which usually last around 45 minutes to an hour. So I, with uncertain movements, as I was barely able to distinguish in my mental faculties one body part from another, grabbed some lube and started to stimulate my penis. My pleasure intensified, something I couldn't even fathom at the time, and with by far the strongest orgasm and ejaculation of my entire life, I blacked out for about 2 minutes, probably continuously shuddering. Once I came back to, I realised that I'd blacked out for around 2 minutes. I turned off my massager and somehow brought my physically exhausted self to the shower. After spending a few minutes recollecting what was happening while taking a shit on the toilet, I realised that I was now tripping way harder than I ever had previously on any drug. My thoughts were constantly interrupted, and random parts of my body would suddenly shudder in pleasure, which, although feeling amazing, scared me since I was not stimulating myself anymore. Trying to take some deep breaths and calm down, I stumbled into a hot shower, lying against the back wall, and tried to meditate and regain some state of reality. I know I ended up spending about 20 minutes in the bathroom altogether, as I later saw on my stopwatch, but to me, I spent almost an entire day in the shower. I definitely suffered a few minutes of total ego loss here and there, thinking I was concurrently existing in multiple lives. In one of these lives, I was a camel trader in Saudi Arabia, and had fallen in love with a beautiful woman my age, but her father was against her marrying a merchant. I sold all my stock and spent years educating myself in order to become a politician, so that the girl's father would agree to both our wishes to get married. And after the multiple day marriage, we travelled throughout Africa. These types of story hallucinations I had experienced on my 80mg trip before, but there were by far many more in this trip, and they were much more detailed. I felt throughout these many lives my self-orgasm almost as intensely as before. I remember imagining that hot water was embracing and caressing my body, helping me through this intense trip. In a brief moment of sobriety, I realised again how hard I was tripping. I turned the shower off, towelled off, and then walked back out into the kitchen. The hardwood floor was almost neon green, and the tree rings within the wood were floating onto each other. The flat floor suddenly became not so flat, with the rings becoming storm waves like on an ocean. Stumbling back in my room, looking at the stopwatch on my computer, I realised I was about 50 minutes into the trip. Since most of my DPT trips lasted with a peak of about an hour, and then an hour of after effects, I became very scared that the effects were only seeming to strengthen. I turned the music off that was still playing on my computer, since it seemed only to aggravate the effects, giving me a few more orgasmic spasms before I could grab my cell phone. Knowing I would rather be safe than sorry, I called a friend who I knew would still be up and could distract me for whatever the remaining duration of my trip was. This was a great idea. After telling him what I was on and what I needed, we proceeded to chat about random things, distracting me for about 40 minutes in real time. During this time, I ambled between my living room and kitchen, glancing at the clock every now and then. Multiple times, I commented how it was amazing we had only been talking for X number of minutes, since to me, it seemed like we had spent entire days together and had caught up about every single particular detail in our lives. My thoughts were often nonsensical, but my mood consistently increased as the visual hallucinations of the floorways slowly subsided. After thoroughly thanking my friend, I then took 5mg of melatonin to help me sleep, and after meditating for what was probably only a few minutes, I achieved sleep and woke up to my alarm Friday morning, and managed to somehow get to class on time. All the lights seemed to be much brighter, and my body was still feeling residual pleasure throughout the entire day. Worrying that I might cause some damage if I overexerted myself, I skipped the gym and decided to rest. After another night of sleep, I felt truly 100% sober once again. Overall, I'd probably say this was by far the most interesting and pleasurable experience I've ever been through. A definite +4, as if I knew how to achieve this and control it. I doubt I would care about anything else. The unexpectedness of the trip intensity with such a low dose was extremely scary at points. I definitely will try this again, but next time I'll be a bit more prepared for the aftershocks and after effects. If there is any moral to this story, be careful with sex and psychedelics. It is amazing, but DPT is not a drug to take lightly, since it can blast you to realities beyond imagination.